He had spent most of his life walking into places that other people called strange or forgotten. That was what he loved most, those quiet corners of the world where time seemed to stand still. So when a message came one morning from a lumberjack deep in the northern woods saying he had seen something impossible, he didn't think twice. The message was short and clumsy, but one part caught his eye. A giant metal ship in the middle of the forest. He read that line twice. A ship in a forest? It sounded like nonsense, yet something inside him stirred. It wasn't the first time he had heard stories that sounded absurd but turned out to be real. He had explored abandoned mines, lost planes, and ghost towns swallowed by sand. But a ship, something that should belong to the ocean, standing in the middle of the woods was different. It was impossible, and that was reason enough for him to go. He packed lightly, as always. A camera, a small drone, a flashlight, his notebook, and a week's worth of supplies. The road to the forest was rough and lonely, the kind where trees pressed against both sides of the path, making the world seem smaller. The locals at the nearest village looked uneasy when he mentioned where he was going. One old man simply shook his head and said, "You'll hear the wind whisper out there, but it won't be the wind." That sentence stayed with him as he drove deeper into the wilderness. The signal on his phone vanished hours ago. The dirt road turned into a trail, then into nothing at all. He parked his jeep near a clearing and continued on foot, following the coordinates the lumberjack had sent. The forest was thick and old, its air damp and heavy. The ground was soft under his boots, covered in moss. Every sound, bird calls, rustling leaves, his own breathing, felt too loud in that silence. He stopped several times to check his map and compass, but something was strange. The compass needle kept twitching as if confused. He frowned but kept walking. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became. Not even the insects made noise now. It felt as though he had stepped into a place that didn't want to be found. After nearly 3 hours, he noticed something glinting between the trees ahead. At first, he thought it was water reflecting sunlight, but as he got closer, the reflection grew larger, brighter. His heart began to race. He pushed through the branches and froze. Before him stood something massive. A wall of silver-gray metal rose between the trees, smooth and silent. It wasn't a wall, it curved upward and outward. He realized what it was only when he stepped back. It was a ship. The forest surrounded it completely. Enormous trees wrapped around the structure, their roots digging beneath its base, their branches scraping along its sides. The ship must have been over 200 feet long, maybe more. The hull was dented in places but mostly intact, covered in streaks of rust and moss. He couldn't believe his eyes. A ship of that size could never have reached here by any normal means. There were no rivers wide enough, no paths strong enough. He slowly walked around it, touching the cold metal with his gloved hand. The surface was smooth and strange, too smooth for something that should have been weathered by time. There were markings on the hull, faint and hard to read. They weren't letters he recognized, not English, not any language he'd seen before. He pulled out his camera and began filming. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke into the lens. "It's real," he whispered. "There's a massive ship here in the middle of the forest. No tracks, no signs of how it got here. It's just here." He launched his drone to capture a wider view. The drone's camera climbed above the treetops, giving him a breathtaking shot of the ship's size. From above, it looked like it had been resting there for decades. Trees grew tightly around it, some even sprouting through parts of the hull. He watched the live feed, his mouth dry. The top of the ship had what looked like a deck, but no masts or sails. It wasn't a wooden ship either, it was all metal, like something from the mid-1900s, but more advanced somehow. He brought the drone back down and stood there, trying to make sense of it all. The sun was slipping lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. He decided to camp nearby for the night before exploring the interior. He pitched his small tent not far from the ship, though part of him wished he'd stayed farther away. Even in the fading light, the vessel seemed to watch him. As night fell, the forest grew alive again with faint sounds, crickets, wind, and distant hoots of owls. But beneath those natural noises there was something else, a low hum, deep and steady like the faint vibration of machinery. He sat up straight listening. It was coming from the ship. He switched on his flashlight and pointed it toward the hull. The metal surface faintly vibrated under the beam. It was impossible, yet he could feel it even from a few meters away, a gentle pulse like a heartbeat hidden under layers of steel. He whispered to himself, "How can it still have power? Sleep didn't come easily that night." Every few minutes he thought he heard faint clicking sounds from the direction of the ship, like metal expanding, or something moving inside. He tried to convince himself it was just his mind playing tricks. The forest had a way of doing that. But as he finally drifted to sleep, he dreamed of waves crashing against trees and a ship sailing through mist, not water. By morning, he was more determined than ever to go inside. He packed his gear, took a deep breath, and approached the massive vessel again. The morning light made the metal gleam softly through the fog. Birds fluttered across the top deck, perching on rusted railings. He walked along the base of the ship until he found what looked like a hatch, half buried in roots. It was wedged open, just enough for a person to squeeze through. He hesitated for a long moment, looking into the dark gap. The air that came out was cold and stale, with a faint metallic smell. He switched on his flashlight, crouched down, and slid inside. The inside was nothing like he expected. The walls were lined with panels covered in switches and strange symbols. Everything was coated in dust, yet the air felt dry, not damp like the forest outside. He whispered softly to himself as his light swept across the narrow passage. "This place doesn't belong here." He moved deeper, every footstep echoing through the hollow corridors. Some of the doors were sealed shut, others hung loosely on broken hinges. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines. He noticed that some of the metal panels were still warm to the touch. That hum he'd heard last night, it was louder here. He came across a room filled with old crates and strange equipment. Some looked like normal tools, others didn't look human at all. Smooth, rounded devices with no seams or screws. In one corner he found a book half buried under debris. It was a logbook, thick with yellowed pages. The writing inside was uneven, switching between different languages. He could barely make out some parts. Test voyage. Malfunction. Storm above forest line. He flipped through the pages until one line stopped him cold. It said, "If anyone finds this, remember, the sea was never where we came from." He read it again, trying to understand. The handwriting ended abruptly after that. The rest of the pages were blank. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the corridor. It was soft but clear, metal tapping against metal like footsteps in another part of the ship. He froze, holding his breath. The sound came again, one step, then another, slow, deliberate. He turned off his flashlight and listened. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before. After a few minutes, he whispered nervously, "It's probably water dripping. That's all." He switched his light back on and forced himself to keep moving. At the far end of the corridor, he found a door that seemed newer than the rest. It was sealed tight with a small glass window. He wiped the dust from it and peered inside. The room beyond was filled with dark shapes he couldn't quite see, but one of them glimmered faintly, like a screen still glowing with weak light. He reached for the handle, but before he could turn it, his flashlight flickered. The hum beneath his feet grew louder, as if the ship had suddenly woken up. The sound of static filled the air, and somewhere deep inside, something mechanical shifted. He stumbled back, breathing hard, the light trembling in his hand. Then, just as quickly as it began, everything went still again. He stood there in the silence, heart pounding, realizing that this was only the beginning. Whatever this ship was, it wasn't abandoned. And whatever had brought it here, into this forest, was not done yet. Outside, the wind began to rise, moving through the trees like a whisper that carried a warning he couldn't yet understand. The air inside the ship felt heavier the next morning. When he woke, a thin layer of mist floated above the forest floor. The sun hadn't broken through the clouds yet, and everything around him looked pale and distant. He sat outside his tent, drinking a quick cup of coffee, staring at the silent shape that stood between the trees. Even now, after seeing it up close, he still couldn't fully believe it was real. He had slept little. All night, faint thuds had echoed from within the metal hull. Sometimes they sounded like distant footsteps, sometimes like machinery starting and stopping again. He told himself it had to be the cooling of old metal or animals moving about inside, but deep down he knew the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. Still, curiosity pushed away his fear. He packed his camera, notebook, flashlight, and drone once more. Before entering, he walked slowly around the ship again, trying to see it from different angles. On one side, the hull was smoother and less damaged. The metal seemed different here, lighter in color, almost silver when touched by sunlight. He ran his fingers along one of the strange markings and noticed something odd. The symbol wasn't carved or painted. It was part of the metal itself, like it had been grown into it. He whispered to himself, "Who built you?" Taking a deep breath, he slipped back inside through the same open hatch as before. The smell of metal and dust wrapped around him again. His flashlight cut through the darkness, showing long, narrow hallways that seemed to stretch forever. He marked his path with small strips of orange tape so he wouldn't lose his way this time. The hum he had heard yesterday was still there, faint but constant. It didn't sound like any generator he knew. It was lower, almost like the vibration of the ground before an earthquake. Sometimes it grew stronger, then faded again. He turned left into a wider corridor where rusted pipes lined the ceiling. His light caught something shiny near the wall, a broken glass panel with a screen behind it. He wiped away the dust and saw faint symbols flashing slowly in green. They didn't make sense, but one looked like a map or diagram. The strange thing was the lights were still on even after all these years. He recorded everything with his camera, speaking softly. "There's still power here. Somehow the system hasn't died. I don't understand how that's possible." A few steps farther, he found what looked like a control room. Dozens of buttons and levers surrounded a circular platform in the center. The screens were cracked, but a few still glowed with dim light. His flashlight swept across a metal chair bolted to the floor. The seat was covered in dust, but it looked recently disturbed, as if someone had sat there not long ago. He kneeled beside it and saw faint prints on the floor. Not clear footprints, but marks where the dust had been moved aside. His chest tightened. "Someone else has been here," he whispered. He reached for his camera again when suddenly a loud metallic clang echoed from deeper within the ship. It was sharp and close. He spun around, shining his light toward the sound, but saw nothing. His heart pounded. The air seemed thicker now, and the hum beneath his feet quickened. He stayed still for a long moment, then called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Only silence answered. He waited another minute before forcing himself to move forward. He couldn't leave now, not after coming this far. The next door he reached was half open. He pushed it wider and stepped inside. The room looked like a small lab or workshop. Tables lined the walls, covered with metal containers and strange objects that didn't belong to any era he knew. Some looked like glass cylinders filled with dried residue. Others resembled tools, but without handles or visible joints. He brushed dust off one of the tables and noticed a small rectangular device. When he touched it, a faint blue light flickered from its surface, followed by a quiet tone. He froze. The light formed tiny shapes that floated above the table, faint, almost like smoke made of light. They twisted into patterns that looked like stars, then faded again. He whispered, "It's still working." He lifted the device carefully, but it went dark again. He placed it back exactly where it was. His pulse was still racing as he walked to the next door. This one led to a narrow staircase going down. He hesitated before stepping onto it. The metal stairs groaned under his weight, echoing through the hollow chamber below. At the bottom, he found himself in a large circular room. The air here was colder, and there was a faint buzzing sound. His light revealed a massive structure in the center, a machine, perhaps the engine. It was covered in curved plates that glimmered faintly even under the thin layer of dust. In places where the plates had cracked, he could see soft blue light leaking through. He filmed carefully, whispering into his camera again. "This doesn't look like any ship engine I've ever seen. It's not mechanical. It's almost like it's alive." He walked slowly around the machine, his footsteps echoing. On one side, there was a glass capsule connected by thick tubes. Inside, he saw something like liquid that shimmered and moved as though it had its own pulse. He took a step back. He could feel warmth radiating from it. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered again. The hum rose sharply, and for a brief second, all the panels on the walls lit up with bright light. He shielded his eyes. Then, just as suddenly, it went dark again. The sound faded, leaving only silence. His breathing grew quick. Okay, that's enough for now," he muttered, backing away. But before he could leave the room, he noticed something on the far wall. A large map projected faintly onto a metal surface. It showed outlines of continents, but none matched Earth. Some looked similar, but others were completely different, like land masses rearranged in unfamiliar ways. He aimed his camera at it, but the projection disappeared before he could capture it. He stood there in the dim light, trying to steady himself. Everything about this ship felt wrong. The technology, the language, the symbols, even the way it seemed to breathe. He didn't want to jump to wild ideas, but the thought kept forming in his mind, no matter how much he tried to push it away. What if this ship didn't come from here? He made his way back toward the main corridor, using his tape markers to find his path. When he reached the hatch, he realized the sky outside had already darkened. He had been inside much longer than he thought. The forest was quiet again, the air still. He sat by the fire that night, reviewing his footage on the small camera screen. Most of it looked fine. The corridors, the glowing panels, the strange blue light. But then he reached the part near the engine room and his stomach tightened. The screen showed a shadow moving behind him. A tall shape that passed across the light for less than a second. He replayed it 3 times. Each time it was there. He looked toward the ship. Its surface was barely visible through the trees, just a dark outline against the night. The hum had stopped completely now. It looked lifeless again, as though nothing inside had ever moved. He told himself he would leave in the morning. He'd seen enough to report to experts, maybe even the authorities. But another part of him couldn't let go. The ship felt like it was hiding something bigger, something waiting to be uncovered. Later, as he lay inside his tent, he heard a soft scraping sound outside. It was coming from the direction of the ship again. He held his breath, listening. The sound came closer, slow and steady, like something dragging across the ground. Then it stopped right outside his tent. He sat completely still, his hand gripping the flashlight. After a few seconds, there was a faint metallic tap, just once, and then silence again. He waited, heart pounding, until he was sure nothing was there. When morning came, he stepped out and found the ground near his tent disturbed. There were faint impressions in the soil, not footprints exactly, but rounded shapes too large to belong to any animal he knew. He followed them a few steps until they vanished into the forest floor. He turned to look at the ship one more time. The early light shimmered across its hull, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw movement behind one of the cracked windows, like a figure turning away. He blinked, and it was gone. He whispered under his breath, "I have to know what's inside that room." Whatever fear he had the night before melted into determination. He packed his gear again, rechecked his flashlight, and stepped back toward the silent vessel. This time he wasn't just exploring out of curiosity. He wanted answers. Somewhere inside that ship, buried under dust and time, was a story that no one had ever told, and he was going to find it, no matter what waited for him in the dark. The morning air was cold, and the forest smelled of wet soil and pine. He stood in front of the ship again, staring at its towering frame. The sunlight glinted off the dull metal surface, revealing streaks of green moss that had begun to crawl up its sides. Everything about it still felt unreal. The night's strange sounds lingered in his thoughts, but now curiosity was stronger than fear. He had promised himself that today he would go deeper than before, into the locked sections he hadn't explored yet. He adjusted the straps of his backpack, checked his camera, and stepped through the open hatch. The air inside was still heavy, still cold. As he walked, his boots echoed softly through the narrow corridor. The orange tape from the day before helped him follow his old route. Each strip looked faded already, as if something had brushed against it during the night. He passed the control room again and stopped for a moment. The chair he had seen earlier, dusty and half-broken, was turned slightly to the side. He froze. He was sure it hadn't been that way yesterday. For a long minute, he just stood there, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Nothing moved. The silence pressed against his ears. Finally, he whispered, "Maybe the wind." Though he knew there was no wind inside here, he kept walking. The deeper he went, the more the hum beneath his feet grew stronger. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a pulse hidden under the floor. He came to a metal door he hadn't opened before. A red light flickered faintly above it. He pushed the handle, but it wouldn't move. It was sealed tight. He studied the area around it and found a narrow gap where the metal wall had cracked near the hinge. It was barely wide enough for his hand. He reached inside, feeling cold wires and loose bolts. Then something clicked. The door shifted a little, just enough to make him jump back. Slowly it creaked open. Behind it was a wide chamber. His flashlight revealed rows of strange containers lined against both walls. They were tall and glass-like, covered in dust. Each one had thick metal pipes connected to the ceiling. Some were broken, others still sealed. As he stepped closer, he saw shapes inside the cloudy glass. At first, he thought they were just shadows, but when he wiped the surface of one, his heart froze. There was a body inside. It wasn't human, or at least not fully. It was thin and long, with limbs that looked almost normal, but the skin was pale blue, smooth like glass. The eyes were closed. The figure looked asleep, not dead. The label on the side of the container was written in symbols he couldn't understand. He stepped back, breathing hard. He whispered to himself, "This can't be real." His camera was still rolling. The red light blinked quietly in his hand. He pointed it at the row of containers, counting them. There were at least 12. Some were empty, cracked open. The glass shattered from the inside. A few still held the strange liquid he had seen near the engine room, glowing faintly. He moved closer to another intact pod. This one was smaller, and the figure inside looked more human, almost completely. Its hands were pressed lightly against the glass as if frozen mid-motion. For a moment he thought he saw the fingers twitch, but when he blinked they were still again. He backed away, his heartbeat loud in his ears. "Okay, I'm leaving now," he said softly, though part of him knew he wouldn't. Something about the place drew him deeper. He noticed a control panel near the far wall, half buried under fallen pipes. The screen was cracked but faintly lit. He brushed off the dust and saw lines of symbols scrolling across it. Then a single sentence appeared in English, blinking faintly. "Containment status unstable." He stared at the words, unsure what they meant. Containment for what? A sudden loud sound made him spin around. One of the containers had released a burst of steam. The noise echoed through the chamber. He pointed his light toward it and saw that the glass was now fogging from inside. A shape moved behind it, slowly, like something shifting in water. He stumbled backward, nearly dropping his flashlight. The hum under the floor rose in pitch. Somewhere above him, a metal panel snapped loose and crashed onto the ground. The vibration made dust fall like rain from the ceiling. He ran out of the room, his boots slipping on the metal floor until he reached the main corridor again. He stopped, breathing fast, trying to calm himself. He whispered into the camera, "There's something alive in there. I'm not sure what I saw, but it moved." He didn't know whether to believe what he'd just witnessed or think he was losing his mind. He leaned against the cold wall, listening. The hum was still there, but now it had a rhythm, almost like a slow heartbeat coming from deep below. He decided to check the lower level again, near the engine room. Maybe he could find something that explained what this ship was. The stairs creaked as he descended, and he noticed something different this time. Faint lights blinking along the walls, like the ship was slowly waking up. When he reached the circular room, the engine's soft blue glow was stronger than before. The air vibrated faintly, like energy moving through it. He stepped closer and saw that one of the glass capsules connected to the engine was now half filled with that shimmering liquid he had seen earlier. It pulsed slowly, as if alive. He raised his camera, recording. "I think this ship still works," he whispered. "It's like it's repairing itself." He turned toward the far wall where the strange map had appeared yesterday. To his surprise, it was visible again, clearer this time. He could see continents outlined in pale green. Some looked familiar. Others were completely unknown. Along the bottom of the map, symbols glowed, then slowly changed into English words. He read them out loud. "Route data corrupted. Re-entry incomplete." He frowned. Re-entry. That word usually meant something coming back through the atmosphere. A chill ran through him. Was this a spacecraft? The thought made him dizzy. He looked around the room again, trying to see it with new eyes. The shape, the materials, the smooth metal that seemed too perfect, it all made sense now. Maybe it wasn't a ship that traveled the sea. Maybe it was a ship that fell from the sky. He sat down on the cold floor, overwhelmed. If that's true, he whispered to himself, then whatever was inside those containers, it wasn't from here. He sat there for several minutes, trying to steady his thoughts. He didn't notice right away that the air in the room was growing warmer. A low hiss echoed from somewhere near the stairs. When he looked up, a thin fog was drifting down from above. He stood, shining his light upward. The hatchway he'd entered through was closing. The metal door slid down slowly, groaning as it sealed itself shut. He dropped his backpack and ran toward it, slamming his hands against the cold surface. It didn't move. The room grew darker as the fog thickened. He shouted, "Hey! Is someone there?" No answer came. The ship's hum grew louder, deeper, until he could feel it through the floor. Then through the fog, faint lights appeared near the center of the engine. They formed a circle pulsing like a heartbeat. The glass capsule filled completely with the glowing liquid, casting blue light across his face. He turned and pointed his camera at it, his hands shaking. "I don't know what's happening," he said softly. "Something's turning on." A few seconds later, a deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. The sound wasn't human, it was layered, cold, almost like a recording. The words were broken but still clear enough to understand. System recovery initiated. Crew status, inactive. External presence. Detected, he froze. External presence. It was talking about him. He backed slowly toward the stairs, clutching his flashlight. The voice repeated the words again, louder this time. The blue light flared, flooding the room. The hum reached a high pitch, then suddenly everything went dark. For a few seconds there was only silence. Then his flashlight flickered back to life. The engine's glow had vanished. The air was still again, cold and quiet. The door at the top of the stairs was open once more. He didn't wait. He grabbed his backpack and ran out, his footsteps echoing all the way to the upper deck. When he finally burst through the hatch into the sunlight, he dropped to the ground, breathing hard. The forest looked exactly as before, calm, green, and still. But when he looked back at the ship, he saw something new. Along its side, near the cracked hull, faint symbols were now glowing. They pulsed in a slow rhythm like a signal. He raised his camera one last time and whispered, "Something's waking up in there. I don't think it ever crashed. I think it landed." He stared at the ship for a long time before turning away. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't done yet, and somehow he knew this forest would never be the same again. The video Ethan had posted about the ship spread faster than he ever imagined. At first, he only meant to share it with his small group of followers who loved strange discoveries and forgotten places. But within 2 days, the clip was everywhere, on news sites, online forums, and even local television. People argued over it endlessly. Some called it the greatest discovery of the century. Others said it was a clever hoax, an edited video made for views. Ethan sat in his small apartment, staring at the screen as the comments poured in. His phone buzzed constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Scientists wanted details. Random strangers claimed to know what the ship really was. Some said it was a lost Navy experiment. Others believed it was something not made by humans at all. He couldn't help smiling a little, though his hands trembled from lack of sleep. "You wanted adventure," he whispered to himself, "and you got it." That evening, while scrolling through his messages, he noticed something strange. 3 new emails with no sender's name. Each one had the same subject line: "Stop before it's too late." He opened one. The message was short. "You are dealing with something that was not meant to be found. Leave it alone, no signature, no details." Just those words. Ethan frowned, thinking it was probably another prank. He had received plenty of those before. But the next morning, when he stepped outside to get coffee, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. 2 men sat inside pretending to read newspapers. When he looked their way, one of them raised a camera. He froze. For a moment, he wanted to believe it was coincidence. But as he started walking, the SUV's engine started too. Ethan went straight back to his apartment, locked the door, and closed the blinds. He pulled out his laptop and typed quickly, saving all his original footage on a hard drive. Something told him this was bigger than he had imagined. That night, he decided to return to the forest. He needed more proof, more than just video. He wanted something physical, something no one could deny. Before leaving, he wrote a note to his sister and left it on the table. "If anything happens to me, the truth is in the forest." The next morning, just before sunrise, he packed his backpack, camera, flashlight, food, water, and a small metal crowbar. The drive was long and silent. Every tree along the road looked like it was watching him. When he finally reached the trail, mist hung low over the ground, and the air was colder than usual. The forest seemed different this time, quieter. Even the birds didn't sing. When he reached the clearing where the ship stood, he stopped and blinked in shock. The vines that had covered the hull were gone. The ground around it was freshly disturbed, and there were new tire marks in the mud, heavy ones made by large trucks. Someone had been here. He hurried closer. The hull had a strange shine now, like someone had cleaned it. The open doorway where he had entered before was sealed shut with new metal plates. On one side of the ship, he found a warning sign written in faded red paint: "Danger, restricted area." His heart raced. Whoever had been here was trying to hide it again. Ethan took a deep breath and walked along the ship's side, looking for another way in. Behind a thick cluster of trees, he found a dented hatch half buried under branches. It was smaller than the main entrance, but still big enough for him to crawl through. He cleared the debris, pried it open, and slipped inside. The air was cold and still, smelling faintly of rust and something metallic. His flashlight beam swept across the corridor. The walls were cleaner than before, the floors swept. Someone had removed most of the equipment he remembered. Only a few old panels and cables remained. He whispered into his camera, "Someone's been inside. They took everything they could." But why would they leave it here instead of moving the whole ship? As he moved deeper into the vessel, he noticed new marks on the walls, chalk numbers, arrows pointing to different rooms. It looked like a professional survey team had been here. In the control room, all the screens he had seen earlier were dark now, except one in the corner. It glowed faintly, showing a single blinking message in strange symbols. Ethan tilted his head. The symbols weren't from any language he knew, but the rhythm of the blinking light almost looked like Morse code. He recorded it, planning to decode it later. As he turned to leave, his foot hit something solid under the dust. He knelt and brushed it aside, revealing a small compartment built into the floor. Inside were several glass containers filled with a glowing blue substance. The light inside each one pulsed gently like a heartbeat. He lifted one carefully. It felt warm, alive almost. Suddenly, a soft hum filled the air. The ship vibrated slightly, and a low tone echoed from somewhere deep within. Ethan froze, clutching the container. Then he heard voices, not from inside the ship, but outside. He peeked through a crack in the wall and saw two figures in dark uniforms standing near the sealed door. They carried flashlights and spoke quietly into radios. He couldn't make out the words, but one sentence sent a chill through his chest. "Make sure he doesn't take anything." Ethan's pulse raced. They were looking for him. He turned off his flashlight and crouched low. The humming from the ship grew louder, and the blue containers began to glow brighter, casting an eerie light on the walls. He slipped the smallest one into his backpack and moved toward the hatch where he had entered. Outside, the forest was darker now, and fog drifted between the trees. He ran as quietly as he could, heart pounding with every step. Behind him, he heard the sharp crack of a branch and a voice yelling, "There!" "He's heading north." He didn't look back. For nearly an hour, he ran through the woods, guided only by his memory of the path. When he finally reached his car, he threw the backpack inside and sped away. His hands shook so hard he could barely grip the steering wheel. Back in town, he parked behind an old warehouse and caught his breath. He pulled out the glowing container. The light inside it pulsed softly, then dimmed as if responding to his touch. That night in his apartment, he set the container on his desk and filmed it under better light. He noticed faint letters etched into the glass, some kind of serial number followed by the word containment. He replayed the audio he had recorded from the control room, the rhythmic blinking message. After hours of comparing it to Morse code, he managed to translate part of it. The message read, "Emergency landing complete. Awaiting retrieval." He stared at the screen, whispering, "Retrieval by who?" Suddenly, the lights in his apartment flickered. His laptop froze, and the glowing container on his desk gave a single sharp flash before turning completely dark. The next morning, he found his video files corrupted again. Only one clip survived, a few seconds showing the words "awaiting retrieval" before the screen cut to black. He decided to call a trusted scientist he had met during a past project, a quiet man who studied old aircraft wrecks. After hearing Ethan's description, the man's tone changed. "Don't tell anyone else about this," he said. "I've seen patterns like that on experimental objects from the 1950s, but this sounds different." They agreed to meet 2 days later. But before the meeting could happen, Ethan received another message. This time it wasn't an email. A plain white envelope was slipped under his door. Inside was a single photograph, the clearing where the ship had been, and across the bottom, written in neat handwriting, "You're not supposed to see this again." That night, he barely slept. Every creak in the building made him sit up. Around 3 a.m., he heard a faint humming sound again, the same low vibration from the ship coming from somewhere outside his window. When he looked out, the street was empty, but the air shimmered faintly as if heat waves moved through it. Then it stopped. He sat there until dawn, staring at the hard drive that held his last copy of the footage. He didn't know what to do anymore. Should he share it with the world or destroy it to stay safe? Before sunrise, he packed a small bag again. He had one decision left: to go back to the forest one final time and find answers for himself. The world deserved to know the truth, even if no one believed him. As he closed his door and stepped into the cold morning air, the city around him felt strangely quiet. The same black SUV sat at the corner again, waiting. He took a deep breath, tightened his backpack straps, and walked toward his car. Whatever waited in that forest, he knew he was going to face it, because sometimes the only way to uncover the truth is to chase it, even if it means walking straight into the unknown.